language for grades K through 2. This is a DOE sponsored webinar, so we thank the Department of Education for their sponsorship for this and for the ability to be able to put these free webinars on for you folks. Just a couple of webinar logistics that we have. If you have questions throughout, if you could please put the questions in the Q&A portion. We'll be looking more at Q&A than we are at the chat. The chat does go to everybody and that's all well and good, but where we're really focused and when you have questions is in that Q&A portion. So you'll see that those little sort of speech boxes for you to be able to put that in. If you have any questions along the way, everybody is muted, so don't worry. We can't hear you. We can't see you. You can see us. We are going to turn our cameras off in just a little bit, but those are sort of the logistics here. You don't have to worry too much about anything too crazy going on. It's just the three of us for right now. Just a little bit about who we are. My name is Heather Jenkins. I work for Demonstrated Success, and you can read a little bit about me. General background, been teaching for about 18 years and came out of the classroom. I work mostly with math curriculum and assessment, and I work as a school specialist here. We also have Annie Wallace for the Department of Education. She's your math person. And we have Jennifer Cavallari, and she is your ELA person. If you haven't seen Jenny before, she is new to the Department of Education. She's already started the wonderful work that we need for language arts. She's your lady for the Department of Ed, and a lot of us already know Annie for all the math work that she's done. So we're all here to be able to give you a little bit of information about standards and what we can do to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students in grades K through 2. On that note, I am going to turn my camera off because it's a huge distraction for me as I am going through my presentation. So here we go. All right, our agenda for today is we're going to start with making sure that you know your standards. The next section will be understanding depth of knowledge, or DOK is the way it's referred to in a lot of schools. And then transferring all of that information into the classroom. And then we're going to have a wrap up and question and answer time. So just to get us started, knowing your standards. So this is what standards are, right? They're the expectations that inform and shape one's work, right? They're basically the whole guide of what we are building on and making sure that we are teaching within our classrooms, right? So also with our academic standards, this is the expectations that we have for all students and what we want them to learn, right? We are guided in the state of New Hampshire by the Common Core assessments. And a lot of our districts have taken those Common Core assessments or Common Core standards and sort of mapped them out for our specific districts. But in the state of New Hampshire, we have adopted the Common Core. Why we use them? We use the academic standards really, again, as that framework to help us identify what we are going to be teaching, but more importantly, what students are going to be learning, right? We know the difference as teachers. We know that we need to teach certain skills, but it's really what our students learn that is of the utmost importance. So not just teaching, but what kids are learning. Right? We use them also as a guide to design our curriculum to make sure that we are assessing students. We always are looking at those standards and digging into those standards to make sure that our curriculum and our assessments match those standards. And we also use academic standards to help ensure that all students have access to the same learning goals and expectations. They really help us keep that bar of where we want students and what their student outcomes to be. We keep it at that grade level. We don't want to lower the bar at any time, even though there's been COVID and all of those things. Our bar is still the same for the grade in which we teach, and we just need to meet kids where they are and get them to where those expectations are for our grade level. So knowing your standards, again, for ELA and for math, we are based all of our standards in the state of New Hampshire off the Common Core state standards. And then for our science, it is the next generation science standards. Just so you know, this little like handouts in the bottom right-hand corner, you will be getting access to a folder. It has your certificate. That's a lot of times the questions that we get is there going to be a certificate? And where do I get my PD certificate? It will be in that folder. Tomorrow you will also get access to this particular presentation that we have. And you will have a lot of these handouts in there. So the handouts that we have for this particular slide is I've given you all of the grade level standards for mathematics, and then the full ELA standards. The next generation science standards, just so you know, we can't really print those out. They're a little bit different the way that they're designed, but I'll show you the website that you can go to for that in just a little bit. As you look at standards, all of us have probably seen something that looks like this. These are some ELA standards that we have. And the way that the Common Core standards are designed is they are all organized in a specific way. So when we talk about our domains of ELA or our language arts standards, those are like reading standards for literature, reading standards for informational text. There's speaking and listening. All of those are your domains or reporting categories, right? And then for math, our domains are things like operations and algebraic thinking, numbers and operations base 10. So depending on your grade level, these are higher level grade higher level standards that I'm showing you, Common Core standards, but they're all organized the same way. So at the top, you're going to have your domains or reporting categories. When you're looking at science standards, they're a little bit different. They are based on your types of science, like physical science, life science, and earth science. And so that's the way the next generation science standards are organized. Looking back at ELA again, we had your sort of domains or reporting categories. So now, as I look at reading standards for literature, underneath there, we have different clusters of standards for ELA. So examples of those would be key ideas and details. That's a cluster of standards. Craft and structure is a cluster. And then within that, you have your individual standards underneath them. So when we talk about standards, those are sort of the third level down, right? So reading standards for literature is your sort of reporting category or domain. Key ideas and details is a cluster, and then underneath that is each standard. And those are numbered. So standard 1 for reading standards for literature is here, 1 through 3, and then 4 through 6 is here. Same thing for math. Right now, we know that we're looking at math. Our domain is operations and algebraic thinking. Our clusters are write and interpret numerical expressions, analyze patterns and relationships. And then underneath the clusters are your standards. For science, you do have clusters of standards, but other than that, it doesn't necessarily get down into they're really all specific standards there. So they're really, it's a little bit different for next generation science standards.
So for ELA, the Common Core has created college and career readiness standards, which creates an interdisciplinary literacy expectation for student success across grade levels. This was all based off 3 main shifts or foundational pieces that the developers of the Common Core found to be the previous weaknesses and that they really wanted to build up in their new set of standards. So the first one is regular practice with complex texts and academic language. Skills cannot be considered mastered when they're only practiced in isolation. So these standards call for a staircase of increasing complexity of texts, which students must read in order to be really ready for college, career, and life beyond that. And this requires students to grow their vocabularies through conversation, direct instruction, and reading of those complex texts. Finally, something that you won't see, purposely won't see in these standards is any type of text names or specific strategies. The ELA standards are really meant to be mastery checkpoints and not the roadmaps for getting there. So the what and how of instruction is left to the districts and the teachers to make sure they're getting to that, that end goal. The reading, writing, and speaking is grounded in evidence from texts, both literary and informational. So students really have to focus on the ability to read carefully, grasp information, arguments, ideas, details based on a given text. Students must be able to analyze and synthesize what they're reading in order to present text-based claims, which then they can elaborate upon. Historically, many teachers have put a heavy emphasis on writing that is based in experience or opinions. And while this is great and there's a place for that writing, that alone cannot prepare students for the rigor of college and beyond. And the final major shift that they took into consideration is building knowledge through these content-rich nonfictions that kids are reading. So background knowledge is essential to student success, and kids must be constantly immersed in reading and learning about the world around them if they're going to become successful readers who are prepared for college and for life. So giving stage time to nonfiction ensures that students are developing a full range of skills, and that focus continues to shine a light on evidence-based writing along with the ability to inform and persuade. All right, so the anchor standards. When you think back to what Heather was sharing earlier, when you took a look at what the ELA standards look like in practice, one of the common threads or the common threads that you'll find in ELA are what we call anchor standards. Now, the anchor standards are those college and career readiness standards that you will see woven from kindergarten through 12th grade. For example, we have here the key ideas and details. And these three college and career readiness standards that fall under that are going to be woven throughout all the grade levels so that kids are building with those three shifts in mind over the years. So the anchor standards are identified by the strand, for example, R for reading, college and career readiness, CCR, and then the anchor standard number. So for example, you might see R.CCR.1, which would be reading, college and career readiness, anchor standard 1, which is read closely to determine yada, yada, yada. If you can click through those, Heather. So these are just some examples of the 10 reading, college and career readiness standards that you'll see, the anchor standards, and they have those for each of the strands, for reading, for writing, for listening and speaking, and for language as well. And again, these are just the examples of the writing anchor standards. When you get the presentation, you're welcome to look through these. These are also listed on the Common Core website for your reading pleasure. Here you'll see a progression when I was speaking just a little bit ago about the anchor standards and how they weave through the grade levels. So you'll see at the top that are .CCR.1, which is reading, comment, or college and career readiness standard 1. And then below it, you'll see how it is key ideas and details. And then from here, how that anchor standard progresses through to grade 12. So this is going to show you how the work you're doing in kindergarten, first grade, second grade is going to each year build and grow into something that a 12th grader can put into practice as they get ready to head up to college. This progression work is something that I'm actually getting started or working on now so that we are able to map all of this out for you so that, you know, when you're doing this foundational literacy work in K2, you really have an idea of what the important work you're doing in K-1-2 is driving towards, and how you are truly supporting this college and career readiness for kids beyond their current grade level.
Similar to the reading standards, we have the math standards, and in K-8 mathematics, these are all internationally bookmarked, so benchmarked. So no matter where you are in the world, they fall in line with what other students are learning. They provide guidance and rigor in building conceptual understanding, procedural skills, fluency, and application. So we want kids to know more than just how to do it. We want them to be able to apply the information. We focus on key concepts at each grade level and their developmental progressions and learning trajectories that provide coherence. So what you learn in kindergarten, you then use in first grade, and then you use those in second grade. They link the topics and the thinking across the grade levels. And then the key concepts tend to occur over a 3-year period. So you'll see like addition introduced in kindergarten, really worked on in first grade, and then secured in second grade. The key concepts are there, so in K-2, the concepts and skills and problem solving are all related to addition and subtraction. In 3rd and 5th grade, we move on to multiplication and division and really start beginning our work with fractions. In 6th and 7th grade, ratio and proportional relationships along with algebraic expressions and equations are introduced and worked on. And that all leads up giving students an introduction to linear algebra and linear functions, which prepares them for algebra in high school. Then Achieve the Core, which is a wonderful site and provides both information for ELA as well as math, but their math standards particularly give us guidance in what are the key standards that support the major focus areas that we just went through at each grade level, which ones also provide support to those major focus areas, and then which are additional clusters that they need to know but aren't necessarily supporting the major focus of that grade. And then they also provide us with a progress to algebra. So where the arrow is, you can see how what they're learning from kindergarten all up is getting them ready for algebra in high school, which then falls into everything they need for life, for math anyhow.
Okay, so knowing your standards for the progression of standards for the next generation science standards, this particular site, the nsta.org site, this site is a really great site that helps you understand what the expectations are for kindergarten, first and second grade. I am just going to bring you there for just a second because some of the features of this site, I just wanted to be able to show you. Sorry. For some reason, it would not go to my link here. So here we are for elementary. Again, this NSTA site, all of these links are right in the presentation, so you can get to them tomorrow. But I just wanted to show you. So it says elementary here. We have life science, earth and space science, and physical science. And so there's any of these are hyperlinked. But this particular, these 2 rows go with every section. So it goes with 3, 4, and 5. So it was a little confusing when we were first looking at it. So this is here, but then this K-1-2 also goes with the K-2 engineering and design introduction and their engineering and design area here. So if I wanted to look at the engineering and design standards, this is what it's telling me, what they need to be able to do. Here are the practices, the core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts for all of that. So the way that if you're looking at, okay, in kindergarten, we're looking at weather and climate, you can click here. It tells you what they need to be able to demonstrate. The engineering, science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts again. I know that with a lot of schools, this might be a little bit relative. I know, like in teaching second grade, sometimes I was the one teaching weather and climate, where other people, like maybe kindergarten, was teaching something else. So I know that these are kind of fluid, but you can go into any of these sections to be able to look at the standards and figure out what needs to be done for that. So that's a really great site for your science standards. Also, we have, I know for kindergarten through second grade, you do not do the New Hampshire SAS summative assessments at all. What I will say about that, though, is that you are still responsible for getting kids to understand what they need to at each grade level to get them ready for that. So even though you don't necessarily give the assessments, I wanted to point you in the direction of what are called performance level descriptors, or PLDs, for the New Hampshire SAS summative assessments. These happen to be resources that are on the Cambium portal. They are on the Cambium website. They're rubrics that align with Common Core and NGSS standards. They are also aligned with a level of proficiency for each specific standard, and they are for ELA, math, and again, science. What I do want to say is, even though these are, what I'm going to show you are the New Hampshire SAS PLDs, there's also other sites that have performance level descriptors that are similar. So I just kind of want to show you what these look like. Here's an example of language arts for grade 3. So what it's telling us, again, I realize these are not your standards, but this is your end game for, your second graders going into third grade. So it's kind of nice for you to see. And even for kindergarten and first grade, you can kind of see this is what kids are needing to do when they hit third grade. And you are a part of that. So it gives you the standard number over here, and then it tells you what a student that's below proficient, approaching proficient, proficient, or highly proficient is doing with that skill. And it goes through every single standard for that. So those are the ELA. Same thing with math. This is just tells you what an indicator of each level is. And then each standard, it gives you what kids are doing at specific levels of proficiency. Same thing with science. We're looking at a level 2, 3, or 4, and it gives you all of those specific standards in there and what they're doing at each level. So again, I know that these don't totally apply to you in kindergarten through second grade, but this is sort of where you're going starting third grade and above. In addition, there are writing rubrics for the New Hampshire SAS summative assessment. I know that this is a grade 3 through 5 rubric, but again, you can kind of see what students are needing to be doing when it comes to writing. This is not just third grade that needs to do these particular things. So it's nice to see where your students are going. So I put the link for where the PLDs and where those rubrics are located. It's right on this Cambium, the New Hampshire portal, cambiumask.com, under resources. So you can take a peek at these. I don't want to spend too much time there. So when we look at standards, basically what we're doing is when we're looking at an identified area of standards, these are all the different sites that you can go to be able to look at, here's your Common Core standards here. So we put the link here. If you were wondering about Achieve the Core, the ELA content, the link is here. The math progressions are here. There's also a math interactive coherence map. So if you're looking at something in your grade, you can see what skills they needed to be able to get to that area, or what skills they are going to do that move beyond what you have at your particular grade level. So there's a nice interactive coherence map there. There are math progression documents. that sort of link, it's a link to achieve the core as well, but through the Arizona, state of Arizona, there's some math progressions that they have there. Sorry. The Achievement Network, they have a lot of prerequisite math standards. And then these are the 2 NGSS sites that we have for you to be able to look at your standards and dig into them. We really recommend that you look at not just your year, but you also look at what came before you and what's coming after you. It really gives you a sense of what the foundations were before they get to your grade level and really where you're going beyond your grade level. Not that you want to be teaching standards that aren't in your grade level, but it just gives you a little bit more understanding of the level of knowledge that students need to have at your particular grade level. Moving on here to depth of knowledge, or DOK as some of you might understand it. So just an overview of what depth of knowledge is this is really important here. This first sort of sentence here, it's not really about having something be of greater difficulty or things just getting harder. It has to do with the cognitive rigor that a student is required to kind of use to be able to complete a specific task that you've given them. Depth of knowledge has to do, really has to do with flexible thinking, seeing multiple possibilities or approaches to solving a problem or different perspectives. It also has kids looking at uncovering those perspectives and different approaches to a problem, so that they're understanding it with a new sort of level of knowledge and more deeply than they might have before. This is sort of one of those areas where we, especially in grades K through 2, we really started using language over the last few years, specifically over, well, how did you figure that out? Or where is the evidence that you have to be able to support that? And really looking at questions with a higher level of depth of knowledge to be able to get them thinking and digging deeper into problem solving strategies. Also, when talking about depth of knowledge, so tasks we learn as a beginner, right? Like just things that we're doing that are at a beginning level may seem really hard, right? In the beginning, like we're doing these things in the beginning and it's taking us a long time and we need a lot of practice to be able to do that. So getting into routines and making things more automatic, the depth of knowledge level doesn't change as you're doing that, right? We're just getting kids used to and making sure that the cognitive rigor that it takes to be able to solve a problem is becoming deeper and deeper as we go on. So the more complex a task is, like a DOK or 3 or 4, requires students to apply things in the skills that are DOK 1 and 2 to be able to use those depths of knowledge 1 and 2 skills that they had to be able to complete more complex tasks. So it's kind of, we have the example, we have our little soccer players here, right? So we might have something that we would think is a skill level 1 or 2, which is like dribbling the ball, moving it with your feet, and all of that, and shooting and passing to be able to score a goal. They need all of those skills to be able to go and practice and to be able to do things in different ways during an actual game. One thing I also want to make sure is understood with depth of knowledge is that we are really looking at making sure that students are not just, you're not just throwing a depth of knowledge 3 or 4 at a student. A depth of knowledge 3 is really hard. Depth of knowledge 4 is applying and using what you've learned with depth of knowledge 1 and 2 questions to be able to apply that. It's not like depth of knowledge level 3 and 4 are better or more important than a depth of knowledge question that's a level 1 or a 2, because they need to do level 1 and 2 problems to be able to get to the point where they're able to do DOK 3 and 4. So Annie, I know that I'm probably getting into some of your slides here, so
That's okay.
feel free to kind of go in. I'm so sorry, I'm kind of overstepping. I know that this is a lot of the work that you've been doing too. So maybe if you want to start here, I'll let you kind of take it from here.
Okay, well, you touched on it very well. That depth of knowledge is not a hierarchy. So a 3 or a 4 isn't higher up than a 1 or a 2. You need the tasks at the lower DOK levels because that's what's preparing students for solving and exploring more complex or non-routine problems. And it's getting them the tools that they need in order to reason and to show this is how I got something, or this is how I can support what I'm thinking. It's also a tool that can help scaffold the learning. So if you have, we all know in a classroom, our students are not all at the same level. So while I give them a task to do or a passage to read, how can I scaffold things so that I can pull all my students in so that they can build the understandings and then understand the thinking of others? And it's helping us move them from the basic applications and understandings to the deeper understandings. It's not the number of steps that determine a rigor, it's the non-routine nature and how the reasoning that goes into things. It's not just saying, I know what 3 times 4 is, or I know what the word dog means. It's then how can I use those things as I get into more complex tasks and reasoning.
All right, so what does this look like in practice, specifically for this part with an ELA focus? It was said before, but I'll say it again. It's important that you're using a variety of these DOK levels across your assessment and instruction to make sure that kids are getting a full picture of their, or that you're getting a full picture of their understanding. So at a level 1, with a level 1 depth of knowledge task, you're going to see that this requires receiving or reciting facts or using simple skills, surface level skills. This might show itself through referencing an area of a text verbatim, using a dictionary to find word meanings, recognizing figurative language in a passage that they're reading. So this is what you're going to see probably a lot of when kids are first starting out with their reading skills. And then, like Annie was just saying, they're going to use those skills to build on and explore additional depth of knowledge levels. When you get into level 2 questions, you're going to require both comprehension and additional processing of a text or a portion of that text. These tasks or questions might be somewhat similar to the DOK level 1 questions, but they are going to require a closer understanding of what they're read, possibly through some paraphrasing. This might look like using context clues to identify the meaning of an unfamiliar word, predicting outcomes in what they're reading, identifying and summarizing major events in a story. Looking at level 3, you're going to have a deep knowledge and understanding, which becomes the new focus here at level 3, where students are encouraged to go beyond what is spelled out directly in the text. Kids might be asked to explain or connect their ideas. They'll likely need to support that thinking from what they read using that text-based evidence that we've talked about so often with the Common Core. And this might be explaining how the author's purpose impacts the text, summarizing across multiple sources. And then when we get to level 4, this is where you find your higher order thinking. These are often going to be extended writing activities, extended thinking activities that require students to take information from at least one text or passage that they've read and apply that information to a new task. So level 4 depth of knowledge questions might be analyzing and synthesizing across texts that they've read examining and explaining alternate perspectives, or describing common themes across text. So, you'll see that across text commonality come into play with a lot of this level 4 extended thinking, because that's a really complex higher order thinking skill. So you've done a lot of digesting, and just want to give you a chance to not listen to our voices for a moment and do a little bit of processing yourself. So think of it an emergent storybook. Think of a really base level fun read aloud that you do that everyone kind of knows. Examples: 3 billion goats gruff, hungry caterpillar, giving tree. And take a minute and try to come up with one task or depth of knowledge question or levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 for whatever story you're going to think of. I'm going to give you about 2 to 3 minutes, probably just 2 minutes at this point. We're getting a little late in the game. So 2 minutes, try to think of a couple level 1, 2, 3, or 4 questions for your story. And when you can think of those, if you can throw them in the chat and label them either DOK 1, 2, 3, 4, so that folks know. And then you can take a look at what other people are thinking when they're applying these this depth of knowledge understanding to their own questioning and their own thinking. So take 2 minutes, try to come up with a couple, throw them in the chat. On the next slide, you're going to see the graph that goes along with the DOK levels. So it'll hopefully help you spark some good verbs that you can use when you're generating these tasks.
Heather, Amy has a question in the chat. Can you see it?
I do see the question in the chat. It says, how do these standards intertwine with play-based in kindergarten when there are so many standards and expectations?
I know on the math end, a lot of that can happen as you get used to the standards, and a lot of like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, a lot of your looking at the standards and the expectations really comes from just observing your students and working with your students.
Mm-hmm.
Just one more minute to think of a couple. And if people are feeling brave, no one's going to force you, obviously, but if you can put those into the chat just so people can get a chance to see what's floating around out there and spark some thinking around this. Like we were saying, it's so important to have a variety of questions. So it's nice to be able to see what other folks are generating so that maybe it can help you think through your next set of tasks.
So
Here,
I
Heather,
know,
if you want to pop to the next one.
yeah, I know that there's somebody saying that they can't see any answers here. Some people are sending it to just us, the panelists.
Oh, interesting.
So I'll just read some of them out there. So for the very hungry caterpillar, DOK 1 would be, what did the caterpillar eat first? Somebody also has a different question, but that's basically what we have so far for what anybody's putting in there. We have a couple of other questions there. We have for the giving tree, what did the tree offer first to the boy? So thinking about the depth of knowledge for that, what did the caterpillar need to eat? Why did the caterpillar need to eat so much? So these are all different depth of knowledge questions that people are putting in there.
Right, and I was thinking too, it's nice that you can use these questions to help scaffold the discussions in the classroom.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea. I can see that somebody is trying to raise your hand. It is a little tricky right now to work with raising the hand and unmuting because we're in the webinar mode. So it may be easier for you to put something either in the Q&A or the chat.
There is a question
Mhm.
from the raised hand too, so
Okay,
there's a lot starting to come in.
great.
Nice.
Right, so we have another, just to kind of wrap this one up, the three little pigs, DOK1 would be list the characters, DOK2 would be what do you predict will happen when the wolf reaches the brick house, DOK3 would be how would you describe the third pig and what evidence do you have to support that description? And then another person for the very hungry caterpillar, DOK3, do you think eating those things was the best decision for the caterpillar? Those seem to be to everybody, so you probably could read them on your own, but I just want to make sure.
Nice.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide here. This is more of a math focus. Is there anything else, Jenny, that you wanted to say about this here?
No, that's it
Okay.
for right now.
Great, thanks.
So looking at the math end of things is there are three questions up there. And if you can put in the chat, going from DOK1 to DOK3, DOK4 mathematics would tend to be a task that would last, over a class period or a couple of class periods. But these three questions can show you what the same basic problem looks like at a DOK1, a DOK2, and a DOK3.
So are you hoping for them to put in the chat that
Well, yes, I'm
A
hoping
would
that
be,
somebody will put
you
in the chat, starting which one would be DOK1, then which would be DOK2, and which would be DOK3.
perfect.
So I have DOK1 being B, choice B. So just determining whether the number sentence is true or false. And then I can go to a DOK2. Absolutely, Karen, that DOK2 says just using the digits 1 to 9 at the most one time each. I just need to create 2 true number sentences. And then I can get even more specific and challenging the cognitive rigor by saying, not only do I want to create a true number sentence, but I want one with the greatest possible value, but I can still only use the digits 1 to 9 one time each.
Great. A lot of people have been putting into the chat.
Yes,
That
it's been
exact
good
order.
to see.
So this is good. This is great. Okay.
And this is Robert Kaplinski has put together some nice charts so that you can see different standards. What does it look like at DOK1? What does it look like at DOK2? And what does it look at DOK3? So it's the same problem, but you can see how the rigor and the cognitive thinking reasoning goes up with each level.
Great.
And the link is down at the bottom so you can get them. And from grade 3 to 8, he has specific ones for each grade level.
All right.
And then we have where Bloom's taxonomy, which I think most of us became more familiar with in the beginning over the depth of knowledge. But Karen Hess, who is a Northern New Englander, has put together some nice matrices that show where the rigor and the Bloom taxonomy meet. So when you're starting to look for tasks or develop tasks yourself, these can help you in looking at how do I make something, taking from the very basic step to making it more complex, more rigorous, as well as pulling in the Bloom taxonomy, which is more of a hierarchy, but we still want to forget you can't jump into playing in a varsity team unless you've built the skills beforehand. So we need to give the time and space for our students to present it, to develop the skills, and then to move forward in learning how to apply them and reason through.
Great. So then in this same sort of vein, we have here a sort of look at the cognitive rigor matrix. So has these matrices and that were sort of started in the early 2000s, but all of these tools here, they're all links to different sort of thoughts and rigor matrices. So I'm just going to go into the written and oral communication one here. And so what this shows you, and I'll just make this just a little bit bigger so that you can see it, is it basically looks at Bloom's taxonomy down here in the remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, and what depth of knowledge level 1, 2, 3, and 4 looks like for each one of those. So it's a really great sort of link to a lot of different matrices that have been created that have to do with the depth of knowledge and level of thinking that students need to be able to be working with on specifically. This is writing and speaking. Then there's other ones here as well. Like if I go back here, you could look at a math and science one. So you can look here again down the side, you have remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And then your different depth of knowledge for those particular skills and topics when it comes to math and science. So these are the cognitive rigor matrices.
And Heather, those can really help as schools and teachers start looking at different tasks for their students.
Exactly. Okay, so as we're looking at depth of knowledge, when we're really looking at standards and for us to understand the standards in more detail and to help us really understand what the standards are trying to have us teach, there are a lot of different sites that you can go to. We find that the easiest way to really dig into a standard and to understand a standard is to look at some sample items or some sample questions that have to do with that particular standard. All of these are suggested sites. There's so many out there. But these are ones that we have kind of looked at and vetted to be able to say, hey, take a peek at these. You can find some general questions and sample items. And some are better for specific grade levels, but a lot of the suggested sites are up here. Every single one of these has a link. And then some of the formative assessments that we've been talking about, these just-in-time quick checks, is something that even though they're using Virginia student SLOs and those specific standards, you can see where they align to the New Hampshire Common Core standards, sorry. So those are some nice formative assessments we have there, and then some other links for formative assessments. Obviously, these are grades 3 through 8 for the New Hampshire modulars, but again, as teachers that are getting up into, and getting our skills for our specific grade levels to get students ready for 3rd grade and all the New Hampshire SAS stuff, sometimes those are really good things to be looking at. Okay, so transferring some of this information into your classroom. We have here, if you haven't heard of John Hattie, he's the man when it comes to really looking at and having students learn. He has this whole sort of theory of collective efficacy and making sure that teachers are all on board to look at students, not just individually in their classrooms, but as a whole grade. These are all our students. And the more that we are able to get together as, either grade level teachers or everybody sort of on board with getting students to where they want to be, the higher the achievement level will be. A lot of this has to do with when we're teaching, making sure that all the learning that they have is visible and that they understand specifically what they are learning, what the purpose is of what they're learning, and having it be always sort of in front of them so that the students can then understand, I know the purpose and this is what I need to reach. And it is 100% aligned with higher levels of achievement for students. So getting into that. So here we go. This is you, Annie, is our visible learning person.
Whoops, yeah, Heather, sorry, I had muted myself because they were having too much fun in the hallway.
Okay, sounds good.
So basically what John Hattie is saying is we need to make our learning visible to have the highest impact on student learning. Just like you don't want to have somebody say to you, read this book or let's go to the movies. You want to know, what is the movie? What is the book? What is it about? So students come in and they know what they're going to learn and they know when or how they can be successful at it. Then that relieves some of their anxiety.
So in the being time conscious here, one of the purposes that we wanted to highlight these I can statements and success statements is you need to make sure as the teacher that you are always putting the onus on the kids to make sure that they are owning their learning, understanding what they're driving towards with their learning targets, and that you're marrying those things together. So it's not just held with you, that the kids are enveloped in that process of checking and identifying what it is that they're learning.
And the same ideas transfer over into the math. So understanding place values, I can this, so students can do that. And then I can take the I can statements. So Heather, you can go to the next slide. And I can turn them into, I know that I am successful when I can. And this I have found in my own classroom work helps students understand, like, I can do this, I'm not here yet, but I'm working on it. So it gives them a greater sense of control. And this is just a sample of how you can incorporate those I can statements or essential questions or objectives onto classwork sheets or homework sheets that you give them too, so that they can see. And it's also a good communication tool with parents if they're looking at it.
Here, I think it's important to note that for each kid as in a class as a whole, it's important to understand as the teacher where you're at in reference to checks and balances on these state standards, on the Common Core state standards. So make sure that you have a record of when you're teaching things, when you've retaught them, when you feel that kids have mastered the standards. So I will be developing some checklists for you that will be pushed out. Annie has already done a lot of work on this on the math side of things. You can look forward to some checklists to come for your grade levels. They'll be coming down the pike soon, so that hopefully you can use them as a reference or as a resource to keep track of your classroom progress towards the Common Core state standards.
And this is an example of the math one. Normally the standards aren't written out there because you can see them down the sides, but so you can see where the skills are coming from in the standards. So, and I am more than happy to send out my drafts to anybody who wants. I have them K through high school. So if you want them, please feel free to email me and I will get them out to you. Transferring to the classroom, in just looking at all the data, we want to evaluate where we value. Those are our essential questions, our learning goals. We want to help students see where they are and where they're going. With the final goal is we really want them to be interested in their learning and not just on the grade they receive.
Right. So the next part of this too is just talking about some tools to help us with planning and transferring into the classroom. So we're going to talk a little bit quickly about, I know I'm looking at the time here, and I don't want to keep you too long, but just talking about scope and sequencing, curriculum mapping, assessment mapping, and then universal design for learning. So just in general for scope and sequencing, I'm just going to move to the next slide too, in curriculum mapping. Sometimes these are used interchangeably. Basically, there are two types of mapping that you can do. One of them would be to map out, okay, so here's just an overarching, kind of, I call it a quick and dirty of what is happening in my classroom in September or October or November or December. And it's just a quick guide for me to make sure that I'm sort of staying on track and whatever. And then in another sense, there is also a map that you can do or a scope and sequence that you can do that says in this particular area for ELA or what have you, here is everything that I am going to be teaching within my curriculum or within that sort of content area that's a little bit deeper than what my overarching areas are that I'm just going to be covering for that grade level. So both of these types of curriculum mapping and scope and sequence and all of that are really important to make sure that we are continuing to focus on those skills and that we know where we're going and how we're going to get there.
And another type of mapping that I know I hadn't heard a lot of until recently is assessment mapping. But if we map out during the year, and it can be as simple as just writing down on a calendar when you gave, a summative assessment, when, your state testing is, when you have district-wide testing like your NEWAS or your iReady. And it can help you pinpoint where our crunch points are for the students. And while you have your students catered to, you have your students pretty much all day long. Middle school and high school teachers don't. So this can help them see where maybe across the board in all their classes, they have really crunch points, and then they can work as a team how to lessen that. But in even looking at where are you giving assessments in terms of holidays or how close to state assessing or school assessing. And it helps with the backward design. Like, when are you planning to assess, and then what are you going to do to get your students there? And because whoops.
No, you go ahead.
You can move on to the next slide.
Okay.
And we just want to make sure too that all our assessments are aligned with each other. So the state assessment is going to be testing way more broadly than you are in your formative assessments. And this just gives an example of the state standards and where maybe they're assessing, or maybe where you're planning your lessons and then when you give the assessments for them. So you can ensure that your students are learning what you want them to learn.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed recently too, as people are mapping out their curriculum and their scope and sequence and all of that, that they are now adding columns in for where the assessments are taking place. So sometimes these are kind of all intermeshed as well.
Yes, yes. And then, so just transferring to the classroom, it's just being thoughtful about everything, that we want to make sure our assessments are assessing what we want them to assess, and that they're giving us the information so that we can support our students as they're moving forward. And when they say data-driven instruction, we're just using the data as another way to inform us, the same way you use your classroom observations. And then PLCs are wonderful just to get together as a team of teachers to support each other and looking at student data and how to support the students that you have in front of you. So just the effects of planning and using assessments, they are the communication tools for all the work that we plan and do with our students. We want to make sure that they are learning, or we can pick up on where they're misunderstanding, or if they're ready to move on and be extended in their understandings. It just helps us to help them. Universal design, we know that as well as being a state initiative, it helps us to plan for all our students. So rather than just plan a lesson, keeping that middle student in mind, we want to take a look at all the students in front of us and how are we going to make that lesson accessible to everybody in our room. And these are just some ideas for you and mappings. This particular one was from CAS, but it helps you to see how you can get engagement, how you can represent things, and how you can get the action and expressions and involvements of all your students. So they're just guides. And then just taking those guides, and then how can you use them when you're thinking about your lessons? What are your learning goals and objectives? What evidence are you going to use, and how and what will be used to get all students there? So it's thinking about everybody in front of you rather than just the median. We want to design the lesson for the students and not necessarily change the students to fit the lesson.
Just to kind of wrap up here too, in transferring to the classroom, there is a Lexile and Quantile hub. There's just some general information here. This Lexile and Quantile hub is an online platform that it's used by educators, parents, and students. We're really looking at from an educator lens here. It gives you really easy access to tools for both reading and math. It is sponsored by the New Hampshire Department of Education, so it's free for New Hampshire educators. You can create a login. You just say you're from New Hampshire, and you should be all set to be able to get online there. Most of us are really, we're familiar with Lexile level, which is reading, but Quantile level is kind of, I feel like a little bit newer. It has more to do with a math level. And these scores are showing us how well a student understands either math or reading concepts at their particular grade level. And these are measures that are going to start showing up and are on the New Hampshire SAS summative assessments. So teachers in the higher grades are a little bit more, maybe more familiar with it, but they are definitely measures that can be used in the lower grades. Just a little bit of, this is sort of what the Lexile tools are here. You can find a book to read at a specific Lexile level. There's little growth planners and word lists, and gives you specific skills that get you to the next Lexile level. And the same thing with Quantile. They have this where we have all these like summer math challenge and the skills database and everything. This little teacher assistant here what this really is important in helping us with is that we can put in a math skill at any grade level, and it can tell us what the prerequisite skill for is for it, what the skill is currently that we're working on, and then where they're going from there. And there's a lot of different resources and everything in there that you can use to be able to use in your teaching or little examples and all of that. I'm not going to get too far into there. I wish we had more time. We're already over time. If you want to stick around for a few minutes and you want to learn a little bit about specifically some of these tools, then go ahead and hang on and we can get you to the Lexile Quantile site. But this is again, a free sort of tool that you can use to be able to understand skills that students need at any grade level. The links are right in here. So this would be the Lexile Quantile Hub. And then also on the New Hampshire Department of Education site, there's a whole page that's dedicated to all the resources that you need for Lexile and Quantile levels. So the link is right here for that as well. And whew, I see a couple people in the chat. You might have some questions that you need answered. So we're just moving right on real quick to the question and answer session. And if we want to go back and discuss anything, then we can.
Yes, and Heather, if people have questions that they think of later, they can email any of us to help them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we'll just hang on for a minute. If anybody does want to get into any of those other areas, definitely put it in the chat and we'll hang on. If we don't get anything in the chat in the next little bit of time, I just want to get you to see some of our upcoming workshops and webinars. Again, all sponsored by the Department of Education. Some really great stuff coming up. We have some creating effective PLCs and defining the MTSS system of support workshop coming up. We have 3 different dates for that. They're pretty much full at this point. If you're really interested in the October 15th date, we can get you set up with Elizabeth Dion is the person who is taking registrations. We have a whole PLC series of webinars coming up. There's more of the understanding standards and depth of knowledge webinars. We did get a question in there saying for grades 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12, is it going to be different? The actual shell or skeleton of this particular webinar is going to be the same, but the examples are specific grade level examples. And then the same thing coming up with some performance and competency based assessments for grades. Well, one of them is grades K through 4, then 5 through 8, and 9 through 12. So those are all coming up. You should be receiving, if you haven't already, I know some MailChimps have gone out and some marketing has gone out for those, but they're always on the Department of Education website or on the Demonstrated Success website. Also, we would love your feedback. We are always looking for ways to improve. So we will be sending you, as soon as you log out of here, you're going to get a quick little survey that we would love for you to fill out. So please let us know. We like to make sure that we are meeting the needs of everybody. And if there's anything that you can suggest to be able to help or facilitate that, that would be great. And then here's all of us. You know, I am Heather. Tammy Hilton is our ELA person at Demonstrated Success. I'm more your math person. And then again, Annie is your math person for the DOE and Jenny is your ELA person for the DOE. We have one. I'm just looking in the chat. Perfect. All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So thank you so much for everybody taking the time out of your day to be able to attend this. If you do have any questions, again, always email us. We're happy to answer any questions that you have, and we appreciate it. Hello, Vicky Canner. I see that she's in there. My old stomping ground people. Hello, hello. All right. All right, it looks like we have some folks hanging on, but we're going to finish up for today. We appreciate you coming. Thanks for all of the thank yous in the chat.